If you're a federal employee, suffering a work injury can feel like stepping into this huge bureaucratic labyrinth. You're already dealing with the pain, the recovery, and then bam, there's this daunting stack of forms and rules just to get reimbursed. It can honestly feel like you're trying to navigate a maze blindfolded. So today we're going to try and cut through some of that complexity. Our mission for you in this deep dive is really to unpack the intricate world of the Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, that's OWCP, specifically their reimbursement process for federal work injuries. We'll be diving deep into a really comprehensive set of insights from a source titled Challenges with OWCP Reimbursement and CA-7 CA-7A Forms. Think of this as your essential kind of distilled guide. We're going to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, highlight some maybe surprising facts, and really arm you with the critical insights you need to avoid those common pitfalls and successfully claim what you're actually owed. This deep dive is designed to give you a real shortcut to be well-informed on this vital topic. We'll cover the three main types of reimbursement.
Wage loss, medical expenses, and travel costs, too. Then we'll get into the most frequent reasons claims get denied, and crucially, what you can do to successfully appeal those denials. Okay, so let's kick things off by unraveling that first big hurdle. How do you get compensation when you lose wages because of an injury? The CA-7 form, it's called Claim for Compensation. That's your go-to for wage loss benefits. That covers periods you couldn't work at all, or even if you need to request something called a schedule award for a permanent impairment. But here's a really non-negotiable requirement. If your time off was like intermittent or maybe just partial days, you must include a supplemental form, the CA-7A time analysis form. That's where you have to meticulously detail the specific dates and hours you missed.
Right, and those forms, the CA-7 and 7A if needed, they typically need to be submitted biweekly, aligned with pay periods for ongoing disability.
Exactly. But here's the absolute linchpin, the thing that holds it all together for your claim. All those absences must be backed up by medical documentation, and it has to clearly show the disability on those specific dates was directly related to your accepted work injury.
Yeah, the physician's report has to be explicit. It must state the employee, quote, could not work during that period due to the accepted injury. That's such a critical distinction, and I think many people miss it. It's not enough just to say, I was injured. The doctor's report has to directly connect the inability to work for specific dates to the accepted injury, which, brings up a really crucial point. What happens if your doctor, who might be brilliant medically, isn't familiar with these very specific OWCP documentation requirements? That could be a huge sort of unforeseen hurdle for a lot of folks.
You're absolutely right. That's a really common stumbling block. The admin side can be just as complex as the medical side, unfortunately. Now, here's something that can be a real aha moment, a game changer for some. The leave dieback process. Okay, so if you initially used your own sick or annual leave because you were out maybe before the claim was approved, you can actually buy back that leave.
That's not just some quirky rule, is it? It sounds like a vital financial tool.
It really is. It means filing the CA-7 and CA-7A plus another form, a CA-7B leave repurchase worksheet. You do this through your agency. Now, the timing is key. You have to do this within 1 year of using the leave after your claim is accepted. And it generally covers situations where you used at least 40 hours of leave.
Okay, so financially, how does that work out? You repay the leave hours using the OWCP money.
Yeah, essentially. You use the OWCP compensation you receive, which remember is typically only 66 to 75% of your normal pay, to repay the value of the leave hours. And then, importantly, your leave balance is restored.
Ah, okay. So it's a safety net.
Yeah.
Use your leave first if you have to, then get it back later.
Exactly. It helps bridge that gap without sacrificing your future leave. But you have to remember that 1 year window. It's strict. So the bottom line here really is meticulous attention to detail. Every blank on these forms, every piece of supporting documentation, it all has to be absolutely accurate and complete.
And common issues that lead to delays or denials often happen if that CA-7 is incomplete, right? Or if it's missing the CA-7A for those intermittent claims.
Or, just like we were saying, if the medical evidence like the doctor's note or maybe a CA-20 report doesn't clearly tie the missed work to the accepted injury.
Yeah. Those seemingly small omissions can trigger an automatic denial, and then you're forced into what can be a lengthy, really uphill battle of appeals. It's critical.
Okay, so beyond lost wages, there are often those out-of-pocket medical costs, and they can really add up. This is where Form OWCP 915 comes into play, but surprise, surprise, it has its own distinct set of rules.
Right. Its purpose is solely for out-of-pocket medical expenses related to treating an accepted work-related condition, correct? Like prescriptions, maybe copays for doctor's bills.
Exactly.
And for this, you must include supporting documentation. Things like an itemized bill from the provider, actual proof of payment, think receipts or canceled checks, the exact date of service, and those all important medical codes. The CPT codes, current procedural terminology, and the diagnosis codes, they standardize everything.
And a really key detail you absolutely cannot overlook. Your OWCP case number must be on every single page you submit.
Every single page. And just remember, this form, the 915, it's only for medical costs, not for any travel expenses. That's a different form entirely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that emphasis on itemized bills and specific codes, it really underscores OWCP's absolute need for granular detail. They needed to verify every expense. It makes me wonder, what's the most common mistake people make regarding that critical accepted condition requirement? Because that seems like a major tripwire.
That's such a common pitfall. I think many people assume that if their overall claim is accepted, then any related medical bill will just automatically be covered. But it's not that simple. Common reasons for denial include not providing that itemized bill, or maybe missing the CPT or diagnosis codes.
Or not clearly showing the expense is specifically for an accepted condition.
Right. Or even something as simple as lacking the provider's signature on the bill. The sources are very clear on this. OWCP will deny the reimbursement request if those required billing codes or descriptions are missing, and they'll keep denying it until the correct information is provided.
And there's a note about personal health insurance too, right?
Mm.
If your own insurance paid, OWCP generally won't pay you back directly.
Correct. They usually handle coordination of benefits directly with the provider or the other insurer in those cases. You typically wouldn't get reimbursed if insurance already paid the bill. Timing is also incredibly important here, like really critical. Medical bills and these reimbursement claims, they should be submitted by the end of the calendar year after the year the expense was actually incurred.
Or if it's later, the year after your claim was accepted. Is that right?
Yes, whichever date is later. Missing this deadline can definitely result in a denial. It's a hard stop. And one more thing on this. If OWCP only issues a partial reimbursement, maybe because the provider charged more than OWCP's fee schedule allows, they'll notify you of the maximum allowed rate.
And then you might actually need to go back to your provider and ask them to refund you the difference.
Potentially, yes. That can be an awkward conversation, but it's sometimes necessary. Okay, moving on to travel costs. This is where things can get surprisingly nuanced, maybe even a little tricky, because getting to your medical care itself often incurs expenses, right? And OWCP has very specific rules for that too, especially when it comes to distance and whether providers are available locally.
Okay, so there's a specific form for this too, not the 915.
Right. It's the OWCP 957, the medical travel refund request. That's the form you use for reimbursement of these costs. This covers things like mileage, public transportation fares, tolls, parking, and even in some cases lodging or meals if it's medically necessary and involves long-distance travel or maybe an overnight stay.
I think I saw there are actually two versions of this form now.
That's right, they've split it. There's the OWCP 957A, which is specifically just for mileage claims, nice and simple.
Correct.
And then the OWCP 957B for all other travel expenses like airfare, lodging, meals, tolls, that sort of thing.
Got it. And receipts are probably key here too.
Absolutely. You'll definitely want to save all your receipts. They're required for any single expense over $75. And they're always required for lodging or airfare, regardless of the amount. Mileage reimbursement is based on the standard federal mileage rate that was applicable on the date you actually traveled. And you can list up to 3 separate trips per form, which is handy.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about this 100-mile rule I've heard about and prior authorization?
All right, this is important. Generally speaking, travel to a medical provider that's within a 100-mile round trip. So roughly 50 miles each way is usually considered reasonable without needing any special pre-approval from OWCP.
Okay, and the travel should be like the shortest route?
Yeah, shortest route, and if it's feasible, they prefer you use public transportation. And this is a big but, if you need to travel beyond that 100-mile round trip, or if your travel requires something like airfare or an overnight stay, OWCP requires prior authorization for that trip.
So you have to get permission before you go.
Ideally, yes. You'll need to explain why that long-distance travel is necessary. Maybe the specialist you need isn't available closer to home, or perhaps you live in a really remote area. OWCP will generally approve it if they agree the travel is, quote, reasonable and necessary and incident to obtaining authorized medical services.
So what's the best practice here? Just call them first.
Definitely. The source strongly suggests Call OWCP's medical authorization line or your claims examiner before undertaking a very long trip. It really helps avoid nasty surprises later when you submit the bill.
You know, this often seems to highlight a really frustrating disconnect. How often do these closer provider denials where OWCP says you could have gone somewhere nearer actually stem from, say, an outdated OWCP provider database versus maybe a genuine lack of diligence from the claimant? It feels like it puts the burden squarely on the injured worker to prove a negative, which is a significant challenge when you're already dealing with an injury.
It really, really does put the onus on you, and that brings us directly to a common and, frankly, frustrating challenge. This whole local provider availability problem. OWCP often denies travel reimbursement, saying, hey, closer medical providers were available, even if in reality those providers they list are maybe retired or not taking new patients or specifically won't accept new OWCP patients.
Ugh. Yeah. The source mentioned a real-world example, didn't it, where OWCP denied reimbursement for travel over 100 miles away because their records showed hand specialists only 40 or 50 miles away.
Exactly. But maybe those specialists weren't actually options. It's like they're giving you directions to I don't know, a ghost town or something. It's not helpful if the place isn't really there or won't let you in. So what you can do, and this is really actionable advice, if OWCP denies your travel saying local options exist, you need to verify those local options yourself.
Meaning, actually call those providers they listed.
Yes. Call them up and confirm two crucial things. First, do they actually treat your specific injury? And second, crucially, do they accept federal workers' compensation patients? Because many don't. And this is key. Document these attempts. Write down the dates you called, who you spoke to, and exactly what they told you, like not accepting new OWCP cases or no appointments available for 6 months, whatever it is.
Okay, so gather your own evidence to refute their claim.
Precisely. Then, you present this information back to OWCP. You might need to write a letter to your claims examiner explaining that you diligently tried to get local care but couldn't access it, and that's why the longer travel was necessary. Providing concrete evidence, like maybe even a letter from a local clinic stating they cannot see you, can really strengthen your argument that the travel was in fact reasonable and necessary under the circumstances.
And ideally, you'd do this documentation before the long trip, or at least while seeking that prior authorization.
Ideally, yes. But even if you didn't get pre-authorization, you can still submit the OWCP 957 form with this documentation explaining the necessity after the fact.
And if they still deny it formally,
Then you absolutely have the right to appeal that decision. We'll talk more about appeals later. Just quickly, other common problems specific to travel claims include, forgetting to sign the OWCP 957 form, maybe missing key information like the specific medical reason for your travel, or just failing to attach all the required receipts. Simple stuff, but it trips people up.
and the same timing rules apply. Submit within the calendar year after the expense.
Yep, same timeliness rule as the medical bills.
Hmm.
Submit them within the calendar year after the expense was incurred or the claim was accepted, whichever is later. Okay, so let's try and pull all these threads together. We've looked at wage loss, medical, travel. It becomes pretty clear that while each reimbursement type has its own specific forms and rules, there are some recurring patterns, some common themes that lead to denials across the board.
Yeah, you start to see the same issues pop up again and again.
Right. First off, just incomplete or incorrect forms. That's a big one. Using the wrong form entirely, like we said, claiming travel on the medical form, the 915, instead of the travel form, the 957, or just omitting required parts, like forgetting the CA-7A for intermittent wage loss.
Simple mistakes, but costly ones.
Definitely. Second, and this is perhaps the top reason according to the source, a lack of supporting documentation. This is huge. For wage loss, OWCP will deny compensation if the medical evidence doesn't explicitly support your disability for the specific dates you claimed. The source states clearly, all CA-7 claims must be supported by medical documentation, period.
And for medical or travel, it's those missing itemized bills or no proof of payment or not having the required receipts. That'll trigger a denial almost automatically.
Third big reason, expenses not related to the accepted conditions. OWCP is super strict about this. They only reimburse for conditions accepted as work-related.
So if your claim was accepted for, say, a knee sprain, but you try to claim reimbursement for your high blood pressure medication.
Exactly. It's going to be denied.
Right.
A proactive strategy here, if other conditions develop because of the initial injury, is to work with your doctor to get those additional or more severe conditions formally added to your accepted claim as soon as possible.
Good point. Get the claim updated to cover everything related.
Fourth, those travel distance and provider availability disputes we just dug into. That goes back to the 100-mile rule and the sheer frustration of supposedly local providers just not being available or willing to see OWCP patients.
And the denial letters often use that standard language, right? Travel was beyond what is considered reasonable because services were available closer to home.
Yep, that's the boilerplate. Fifth common reason, just missing the deadlines. We talked about the calendar year rule for medical and travel bills. For the CA-7 for wage loss, it's ideally submitted within 30 days of your pay stopping, though you can file later, but you might need a strong justification for the delay.
And finally, maybe the most fundamental reason. The underlying claim isn't even accepted yet, or it's being controverted.
Right, controverted means OWCP is actively disputing or investigating the claim itself. In either case, not yet accepted or controverted, they simply will not pay any benefits. Not medical, not travel, not wage loss, nothing.
So in those situations, your absolute first focus has to be on getting the underlying injury claim accepted. Everything else hinges on that.
Exactly. Until the claim itself is approved, reimbursement is off the table.
You know, it really sounds like the denial letter itself isn't necessarily the end of the road. It's more like a diagnosis. It tells you what's missing or what needs clarification. So understanding why it was denied is really your crucial first step toward fixing it and getting it approved.
That's a great way to put it. The denial letter is your roadmap.
Yeah. Which makes me wonder, though, how much of these recurring issues, these common denials, truly boil down to injured workers simply not knowing the highly specific, almost, labyrinthine requirements of this OWCP system? Is it just lack of information?
That's a powerful point. It feels like a lot of it is just navigating this incredibly complex system without a clear map. And, maybe there's something about that initial denial process itself, getting that letter, that just feels so overwhelming that it causes people to disengage. Beyond just the complexity of the forms, maybe it's just deflating.
It could well be. It's disheartening, no doubt.
But it really does sound like every denial notice from OWCP, if you read it carefully, is your roadmap. It tells you exactly what you need to fix or provide. Reading those letters really, really carefully is absolutely crucial. And the good news, the really important thing to take away here, is that a denial is absolutely not the end of the road. Federal employees do have concrete options. You can appeal. You could dispute the decision.
Persistence can pay off.
It really can. This is where persistence truly pays off. Now, probably the fastest and often most effective way to overcome a denial is through what's called reconsideration. This basically means you provide the additional evidence or clarification that was missing. You supply that information and ask OWCP to, reconsider their initial decision.
Okay, so if wage loss was denied because the medical note wasn't specific enough.
You go back to your doctor, get a detailed report that directly addresses the reason OWCP gave for the denial, and you submit that new report.
And for the travel denial, if they said local providers were available.
You do that homework we talked about. Document your calls to those local providers, showing they couldn't or wouldn't provide care, and send that documentation to OWCP. You basically write a clear letter, always referencing your claim number, explaining why the initial denial was incorrect or why the expense was necessary, and you attach all your supporting proof.
And there's a time limit for requesting reconsideration.
Yes. You have up to 1 full year from the date of the decision to request reconsideration. But critically, you must include new evidence or a new legal argument that OWCP hasn't previously considered. You can't just ask them to look at the same stuff again.
Got it. New info is key. And this is handled back at the regular OWCP district office.
Usually, yes. Often by a senior claims examiner. And another good thing is you can actually request reconsideration multiple times as long as you have new evidence to submit each time. Okay, so that's reconsideration. Your second powerful option is to request either an oral hearing or a review of the written record.
This one has a much shorter deadline, right? Like 30 days.
Exactly. You must request this within just 30 days of the decision date. So you need to act fast here. You can choose an oral hearing, where you actually get to appear, usually it's by phone or video these days, and you could directly testify before an OWCP hearing representative. You can submit more evidence and really explain your side of the story.
That sounds particularly useful if there's maybe a factual misunderstanding or something complex to explain.
It can be, yes. Or you can choose just a review of the written record. In that case, there's no personal appearance. The hearing representative simply reviews all the documents in your file again.
So if you choose that route, you'd want to make sure you send in any new evidence or maybe a strong written statement beforehand.
Absolutely. But here's an important procedural note. You generally only get one hearing opportunity on any specific decision. And, crucially, if you request a hearing,
You cannot also request reconsideration on that same decision until after the whole hearing process is finished and you get a decision from the hearing rep.
Ah, okay, so you sort of have to pick a path initially after the denial reconsideration with new evidence or a hearing review within 30 days.
Pretty much, yeah. You need to strategize based on the denial reason and what evidence you have or can get quickly.
You know, connecting this back to the bigger picture again, while this whole appeal process is clearly designed to ensure fairness, it really does place an enormous burden on someone who's already injured, already likely stressed, maybe financially strained. It's all about providing that clear, substantiated proof that OWCP felt was initially lacking. Which makes me wonder, why do so many people seem to give up before truly exploring these crucial appeal stages? Is it just the sheer weight and complexity of the process, do you think?
I think a lot of it is exactly that, just feeling overwhelmed, not knowing where to start, maybe not realizing these options even exist or how to use them effectively. It's daunting. But there's a third powerful appeal strategy, sort of the next level up. You could appeal to EC-CHA. That's the Employees' Compensation Appeals Board.
And EC-CHI is independent from OWCP, right? A higher level of review.
Exactly. It's an independent board specifically set up to review OWCP decisions. You have more time for this one. You must file your appeal with EC-CAB within 180 days, so about 6 months, of the final OWCP decision you're appealing.
Okay. And there's a really critical detail about evidence for ECK appeals, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely critical. EC-CAB will not consider new evidence. They review the case based only on the factual and medical record as it existed when OWCP made its decision.
Wow, okay. So you can't introduce anything new at that stage. All your evidence has to have been submitted to OWCP before their final decision.
Correct. That's why getting everything into the record during the reconsideration or hearing stages is so important if you think you might end up at EC-CAB. The EC-CAB process itself is generally more formal, more legalistic, and honestly, it can often take a year or even more to get a decision back from them. ECK has the power to affirm OWCP's decision, reverse it, or send the case back remanded to OWCP for further action.
So this is probably something pursued after exhausting the other options, or maybe if the case involves a really complex legal point. Often with legal help, I imagine.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Especially if it involves a complex or novel argument, maybe about travel necessity or a tricky medical causation issue. And then finally, while they aren't formal appeals, don't forget you can sometimes utilize more informal agency or even congressional assistance.
Like talking to your agency's injury comp specialist, or maybe a union rep.
Exactly. Or even contacting your U.S. Senator or Representative's office. Sometimes a congressional inquiry on your behalf can prompt OWCP to take another look or maybe speed things up a bit.
So that complements the formal appeals, it doesn't replace them.
Right. It's another tool in the toolbox. Just some quick general appeal tips that apply across the board. Always, always, always keep copies of absolutely everything you submit to OWCP. Everything.
Crucial. And meet those deadlines religiously: 30 days for hearings, 1 year for reconsideration, 180 days for EC-CAB.
Yes. And always clearly reference the specific decision you're appealing, include the date of the OWCP decision letter, and of course your claim number on everything.
And focus on the facts, right? Directly address the specific reasons OWCP gave for the denial in their letter.
Absolutely. Stick to the facts and show them exactly why their reasoning was flawed or how your new evidence resolves the issue they raised. It's almost like, OWCP is playing a very specific game of I Spy, and if you don't point to exactly what they're looking for using their checklist, you're out. You have to address their stated reasons. And really, the ultimate takeaway from this entire deep dive, the source material sums it up perfectly, and something we really want you, the listener, to carry with you. Denied doesn't mean done.
That's powerful.
It really is. So many denials are overturned, they really are, when the missing evidence or the needed clarification is finally provided. Persistence is absolutely key, and you can often get the outcome reversed with a well-prepared, well-documented appeal. So let's recap. Today, we took a deep dive into the often, let's face it, challenging world of OWCP reimbursements for federal work injuries. We navigated the specific requirements for wage loss using the CA-7 and CA-7A forms. We looked at medical expenses on the OWCP 915 and those tricky travel costs on the OWCP 957 forms. And we explored the most common reasons claims get denied, everything from incomplete forms and missing documents to disputes over whether a condition is accepted or how far you traveled. Exactly. And most importantly, we hopefully armed you with the powerful strategies available to appeal those decisions, whether it's through reconsideration with new evidence, requesting a hearing or review, or even taking your case all the way to the ECK.
This deep dive, it wasn't just about listing forms and rules. It was really about empowering you with the specific, actionable knowledge you need to successfully navigate this complex system, to make sure you get the compensation and the reimbursements you are genuinely entitled to after a work injury. So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to maybe mull over. Given the critical importance of submitting new evidence for reconsiderations, and that strict rule that ECK will not consider new evidence later on, how might you, as an injured worker, best strategize your evidence gathering and submission throughout the entire OWCP process? Maybe thinking ahead, anticipating potential future appeals, rather than just reacting after a denial comes through.